Good afternoon and welcome back. We are in week 9 where we learn about emotion and stress. And this class, which is our second lecture, will focus on stress and stress management. So we'll learn what is stress, and we'll look at stress as an adaptive response and also as potentially maladaptive response, about the link between stress and illness. And then that's a good segue to talk about stress management, health behaviors, and good coping, what that might look like. So say mindfulness, or how we appraise and construct problems, the bigger sense of spirituality. First, we'll have a visit from Vanessa, Pardo, and Morgan Scott, who are undergraduate psychology students who work with the Counselling Centre providing peer support. Now, as part of your overall tuition fees, you pay for health insurance, right? And you also have access to a student health clinic, and some of your coverage, like I think it might be something like $1,000, can go towards paying for psychological services. So you might go and see a doctor at the health clinic and then get a referral to an external psychologist or psychiatrist whose services will be covered up to a point under your health plan. We also have a counseling center where there's psychologists and counselors working who can help with personal counseling. And with that, I'd like to invite Vanessa and Morgan to tell us more.
Sure. Thank you. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us in your class today. I'm Morgan. I'm Morgan, as we said, and this is Vanessa, and we're your peer supporters. So I don't know if anyone's heard about peer support before, but we're students, as was mentioned, and we offer free confidential services to fellow students. So we can talk about stress, mental health, difficult times, really anything that you may be struggling with, we can help you navigate. So to book an appointment with us, you can go to the counseling website, and through that, you'll need your St. Mary's email, because we're booking through Teams for one-on-one sessions, but we also do in-person sessions if that's something you prefer and are comfortable with. And here's just a little snippet of what our office hours are. We do Monday to Friday at a few different times there. So something that we're focusing on this semester, aside from one-on-one support, is collaborations with the Res Wellness team. So we have an event that's actually happening tomorrow. It's called Speed Friending. And basically what's going to happen in that session is we're all going to meet on Zoom. You can sign up through there's a link on here, but you can sign up through the SMU calendar. And basically through that, we're going to have some conversation starters just to get people talking and connecting. And hopefully through that, you'll be able to meet some new people that you might not have been able to meet before.
One other thing that I will add to that is we have done it last semester, and we had quite a lot of people showing up. It was almost 30 students that came to it, and most of them, they label themselves as introverts, and they found that like even before COVID, they were having a hard time to make friends, just to socialize. So you're most likely going to be surrounded by people who have had similar experiences, or they're just feeling also that it's just weird to just come to class and talk to the person next to you. Some people are not that comfortable with it. So you can be sure that it's going to be a safe space. We're always going to be there. So if you're feeling uncomfortable, or if the conversation is just not going the way that you want it, you can just let us know, and we can figure out, very arrangement for you.
So in addition to that, we are also having a self-care session, bingo. So bingo is pretty self-explanatory. We're all going to meet and just play a big game of bingo. Probably talk about some self-care topics, maybe what you like to do for self-care, and you might be able to get some new ideas for self-care that you can implement into your own lives.
Is there anything okay. All right. I'm just gonna talk a little bit about the Counselling Centre. Is it okay if you raise your hand if you have heard about it, used it before?
If you're not comfortable, that's okay too. You don't have to share that.
And is someone comfortable with telling me why it is that you haven't used it, or if you're not aware of it, it's because you just don't see it or you don't hear about it, or nothing? Okay, go ahead. Thank you. Yeah, you're right. You, you raise your hand?
Oh, no.
Okay, sorry. Anyways, well, the Counselling Centre is free. It's part of your tuition. So the way that I like to see us as a student as well is I might as well use all those services that we're paying for anyways. It's 5 counselors. None of them are there to judge you. None of them are there to be like, well, this is not big enough for me to, spend my time on it. So don't feel like you need to be, hitting rock bottom, or that you need to be like unable to leave your bed to be like, okay, I definitely need counseling. There is so many benefits to it. And the conversations go as deep as you want it to go. They're not gonna like push you to talk about anything you don't want to. Like it's, they're just there to listen and to support you and give you resources and coping skills that you can use in the future. Maybe around this time is like when we have so many assignments to hand out, exams are coming, and we have the pressure that we have to get a good grade. And it's important to know that like, it's fine if you're very stressed, it's fine if you're very like overwhelmed, burnout, like it's okay. And even if you're in your last year, it's still gonna keep happening. So it's good to have like a nice toolkit where like, you can just access to it whenever you can. The Counselling Centre offers both in-person and online appointments, I believe. Whatever you prefer. You can make appointments either by stopping by the office. It's in the 4th floor of the Counselling Centre. You can give them a call or just go onto their website. Then the website, you find a form and it asks you just for emergency contacts and like 3 reasons why you're reaching out to them. And if it's your first time visiting them, they will give you an intake appointment. It's 30 minutes long, and just to figure out a plan that works best for you. You can also choose your own counselor. So on the website, you will find pictures of the counselors, just a brief description of who they are and how they can serve you, and you can choose that, or they can just give you a random one if you're okay with anything. Another thing that I like to add is like, even if you start with a counselor and you're not feeling comfortable, you can be like, I just want to see someone else. I'm not feeling it. I would prefer, I think I will be better there's done by someone else. Whatever reason, it's not something they're going to be like, well, you're stuck with me, so you have more options. They're also they just recently hired a mental health educator. And they're going to be offering this skills drop-in. So emotional regulation skills, generally for mental health, stress management strategies, and emotional regulation skills once again later on in April. These are all topics and like subjects that are good for the beginning of the semester towards the end. Like it's never too late to, find out or like do a little bit of research on stress management strategies. Yeah, these are I should hear another. Anyways, this is the phone number, the email, the location, and the hours are available. They're able to do evening appointments if, the 8 to 4 does not work for you at all. The last thing I will add is that they also offer a mental health advocates program in some Brightspace, and you can register to it. In that program, you're gonna find there's just a bunch of models with videos and small text explain topics like stress, anxiety, depression, how to help a friend if that's something that you're interested in. And you can access it to it whenever you want, any time of the day, but you have to make sure that you finish it that semester, because it then restarts the semester after. And I think that's all we have. Are there any questions? Are you curious about anything? Are you worried about anything? Did I miss anything that you wanted to know about? Go for it.
Yes. So you're undergraduates in psychology. How did you become peer supporters?
That's a good question. The process is, well, I should have added that they're going to be hiring for the next year pretty soon. So you should check Career 360 if something that you're into. But, well, just normal process of hiring for a job. Then you receive training. It's quite a lot of hours of training. And it's along with, because every single university have peer supporters. They have at least 2 to 3 peer supporters. It's with all together will receive training on topics like suicide or how to which is think how to deliver like coping skills and stress management and all those mental health and wellness topics. And then, yeah, I think that's it. We always have a supervisor that is there for us in case, we feel like we just don't have enough information to help out someone, or in case we have any questions or concerns.
Thank you both so much. That sounds like a really great step along a career in psychology.
Yeah, it really matches because both of us want to be counselors. So
Great,
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just head out quietly and.
Yes, and I've posted the resource you provided to Brightspace.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, so on to stress. So I'm sure you all talk about stress. What is that? You're right. What does that mean when you say you're stressed or something is stressful? Nobody knows? Yes, Joseph, reliable one.
I guess it's like something that's bothering you.
Okay, something's bothering you. Well, let's say that bother. That's an interesting word.
So I was thinking more like if something's on your mind, it's kind of bothering you, like you need to finish an assignment or something. Sometimes you get a little bit stressed out about that. Or just like sometimes I guess like I feel like it's like a bodily function.
Yeah.
That helps you with
I feel like you're referring to tension. Kind of like, let's say if something's bothering me, there's a mosquito in the room. I'm kind of getting ticked off, or it's gonna bite me. Anything else? Yes.
It's like the accumulation of like tense situations with tension.
Yeah, whatever it is, it can get worse and worse. Yes. Can you say that louder? I can't, because I can't lip read because you're masked.
Someone feels pressured by a lot of stuff that they have to do and then just get the pressure.
So I'm hearing about pressure. I forgot to flip my Zoom view, so this will be in mirror for those who are following along on Zoom. So I'm sorry about that. I'll have to read it backwards. So pressure and tension. Am I missing anything? It can add up. I heard that there's a bodily reaction. I think someone said that. What are some things that you find stressful? I didn't hear you. Louder, please. School. Okay. Me too. I find lecturing really stressful. I'm going to put that one up there. I have to listen to myself for a whole hour. I can't like space out. Anything else?
Figuring out life.
Figuring out life. Ooh, like really grappling with big problems. Like that's like a wicked problem, right? What to do with my life. It's quite common for students to feel anxiety about that. Anything else? What's stressful? Sorry? Calling people. Other people in general can be very stressful. So kind of dealing with people. There's others. I mean, even things that are good and positive and pleasant in our life, like our family and friends, can be very stressful. Anything else? Yes. Deadlines. Yeah. So what is a deadline? It's something that puts pressure on you to get something done by a certain time. And it takes away the resource of limitless time. Anyone else? Okay. So stress is defined in your book as a process by which you perceive and respond to stressors. Now, what's a stressor? Okay, so stress is the process by which you perceive and respond to a stressor. And a stressor is anything that puts a demand on you or threatens your well-being, which is another way of saying it. It's putting a demand on you. And deadlines is a demand that takes away the resource of time. Other people can put demands on you. Other people can threaten you. Right? Thinking about big problems can suck your energy out. Okay, and there's a lot of demands on you at school. And there are different levels of stressors. So there can be big, terrible, cataclysmic events. Those are catastrophes. Right? If there is an earthquake or a war, that is a really big stressor. Then there are significant life changes, and they can even be positive, like ask a bride if her wedding isn't stressful. Right? Ask a new parent of a much-loved child if that isn't stressful, or much-loved teenager. Okay, so good things stress us out too. Changes and transitions are naturally stressful. And then there's what we call daily hassles. So there's little things that you encounter in your day, normally, throughout the day, that put pressure on you. And just like you said, they're little things that add up, okay? So maybe you get stuck in traffic and you didn't have time for breakfast, and now you're late for class, and you get the evil eye from the prof, and then you can't get through to your friend on the phone, and then you miss a deadline. You get it, right? So little things can add up. But what's key to it is that they're always putting a demand on your resources. So go back to that adaptivity model of success. You have resources in your life, you go use them in intelligent ways to be well and successful. Well, stressors are all the things that drain your resources somehow and put demand on them. Here's a slide on the nervous system from last week when we were studying the brain and the central nervous system. So we learned that there's two main divisions. There's the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And the peripheral nervous system has two divisions, autonomic and somatic. And the somatic one is under your voluntary control. I'm going to move my arm. And then the autonomic one is more automatic. Like you can't sort of stop unless you're into some very high level mindfulness strategies. And maybe you're some very high level monk, can't control your heart rate like that. Okay. Even if you can, and there's something you do, it takes some time and some work, right? It's not just like moving your arm. So there are two divisions to the autonomic nervous system, sympathetic and parasympathetic. And one of them is fundamentally about arousing you, pulling all your physiological resources together so that you can go fight a dragon or run away from a tiger. Okay? And then the other one calms you down once you've dealt with that. So let's look at the arousing sympathetic division. That makes your pupils dilate. Why would it want your pupils to dilate? What's the function? What's the good of that? Yeah, lots more light in. So you can see the threat. And then your salivation and your digestion are decreased or inhibited. What's that about? Sometimes people feel like they have to go to the bathroom before something's stressful. Why are we inhibiting the digestive system and salivation? Yes?
It allocates energy away from your digestive system to be able to better fight the stressor.
Perfect. Because this microphone is not going to pick up your voice for the people on Zoom, I'm going to repeat that.
Yeah.
And what you said is that it reallocates the energy that would be spent on digestion towards the immediate task that needs to be done, the running away or the fighting. Okay, so digesting food, a bit less important right now. We'll do that later, right? In fact, the parasympathetic division will take care of that. It makes you makes you sweat and perspire. That's about your temperature regulation. It makes your heart rate accelerate. What's that about? Why is your heart beating faster? What happens when more blood is pumping around? Yes.
It brings more oxygen to your muscles.
Perfect. It brings more oxygen to your muscles and to your brain, because you're going to need to use them, right? And then the parasympathetic division, the calming one, is the opposite. Okay, so your pupils contract, and now your digestive system wakes up, and I mean, it even has this even has an effect on your sort of sexual system. At this point, you're not interested, and now that'll go back to being interested. Right? So the sort of things like having a snack, having a date that are not important when you're fighting the dragon, now your body is ready for those things. And those two things work in balance. But this puts a lot of wear and tear on your body. And in our evolutionary history, it was designed for dealing with these threats, like, I don't know, lions and tigers and bears. And it was not designed for the kind of lives we live now, which are very artificial, and where we have a lot of these regular stressors that maybe we don't need to have that physiological response to, but that is the way we're hardwired. And that does put a lot of stress on your body, particularly your heart, right? So people who are stressed do have a higher risk of heart disease. And most people at the end of their lives will pass away from heart failure. That's or chronic heart disease. That's one of the top leading causes of death. It's one of the things, the organs that wear out first on humans, just kind of like if you have a cat, it's the kidneys that wear out first. Their hearts are delicate, and this puts a lot of stress on them. So Walter Cannon was the physiologist who defined that fight or flight stress system that we just talked about. And Selye thought about this 3-phase system. So at first there's the alarm, I see the dragon, okay? And then there's the phase of resistance where you're coping with the stressor, fighting the dragon, where you're gonna be doing all these things, but what happens if you're doing that every day, all day, over time? Can you keep doing that? No, right? You're going to get worn out. And so at some point, there's going to be a depletion of your reserves. At some point, you're going to be exhausted. And so they call that general adaptation syndrome. Okay. So stress is obviously adaptive. Your stress is a process. That process is adaptive, right? For all those reasons, you're talking about why, more light comes in your eye, you see better, your heart rate picks up, your blood pressure increases so that you send more blood around and more oxygen. Okay, it's adaptive, but in our modern life, evoking that system over and over again, well, it wears us down. Okay, so it suppresses the immune system. That's another one of the things that gets suppressed. Okay, so your hunger is suppressed, your interest in sex is suppressed. Well, so is your immune system, because those are things that burn a lot of energy, and your body is going to try to redirect that energy to fighting dragons, right? So it suppresses the immune system, slows wound healing. It increases your vulnerability to infections. You have a decreased response to vaccinations, because that effect relies on your immune system. Increases your susceptibility to cancer. It accelerates aging. Okay, it slows the production of new neurons. It accelerates the degeneration of circuits in the brain. Obviously increases the risk of heart disease and general mortality. So it's something that's adaptive, but the way that we use it, and that's something that's quite hardwired, can get us in a bit of trouble. So that's a physiological stress response. There's also a psychological stress response. So stress is a process by which we also perceive stressors, and stressors are things that threaten us or put demands on us. And there's a psychological process of saying that's a threat, or I don't have the resources to meet this demand. Okay, so say you have a stressful event like a difficult test, you can appraise that as being kind of within your resources. Yeah, I have the time to study for that test. I understand the material well enough. I have the room to ask questions. And then maybe you would say, yeah, that's a challenge that you can overcome, because you know that you have the resources and the skills to respond adaptively. You know you can handle that. But what if you didn't have the time? You've got a kid at home. You have to take care of your parents. You just got sick. There's not enough time to study. There's too much material. You can't get the notes. Then, how are you going to feel? You're going to feel stressed. That's different from interpreting something as a challenge. So, your response to challenge is to be aroused, to be focused. Yeah, let's do this. Let's go study. Let's ace this test. But your reaction to a stressor that you judge is above your means to deal with is being stressed to distraction. It's distress. So it all goes back to whether or not you have the resources or can find the resources, right? Have the skills to get the resources to meet the stressor, to effectively deal with it. So Richard Lazarus defines stress as demands that exceed your personal and your social resources. Now, there's problem-focused coping and emotion-focused coping. Sometimes when there's a stressor, you can go out and deal with it. You can go out and do something to change it. You can be angry and have that conversation that changes the trajectory of the relationship so that everything is better. Or maybe you can't. So if there's something, this goes back to a question from last class. If there's something you can do about it, go do it. Okay, that's problem-focused coping. There's a problem you could solve, go solve it. But sometimes you can't. And sometimes you want to address an emotion anyway. Maybe addressing the emotion will help you be more calm so that you can have the distance you need in order to solve a problem rationally. That's called emotion-focused coping. And it's about removing or reducing the emotions. And just as you asked, yes, exercise is a very effective emotion-focused coping strategy. It makes you feel better. So Lazarus and Folkman had a transactional model of stress and coping. So first there's your primary appraisal. So there's some stimulus. Maybe you see it as a bad thing that's threatening. Maybe it's a bad thing like a mosquito in the room and you think that's irrelevant. Okay, but let's say you see that this is like a challenge, a threat, there could be harm, there could be loss. Then in the secondary appraisal phase, you'd say, do I have the resources and the skills to actually deal with this? And if you don't have the resources, then you're sort of stressed to the point of distress, okay? Whereas otherwise it might be an arousing challenge. And so how do you cope with that stress? How do you overcome it? Well, you can use problem-focused coping and change the situation. You can use emotion-focused coping and change your relationship to the situation or your reaction. And I'd say, in fact, maybe you can use both, okay? The transactional model of stress and coping is quite famous in psychology, and it also owes a great deal to Lazarus's graduate student, Susan Folkman. There is an academic dynamic in psychology that I want to identify because it's one that's come up and I've noticed it coming up a few times so far. And it's the dynamic between a usually male academic supervisor who gets the credit and the status and the awards, and then the typically female research assistant or graduate student who does a lot of the heavy lifting, even in conceptualizing work, researching and writing, but kind of doesn't get the credit, maybe doesn't get to be the first author. And so if some people say, well, you know, all the sort of famous figures we hear about in psychology are these men, well, often there's women there too, okay? We just might not, they might be written out of the narrative, okay? So it was there with Watson and Raitner and that famous research on learning with little Albert, okay? So I'm not saying that, you know, that's the dynamic between Lazarus and Folkman. I think Susan Folkman did very well in her career, but I do want you to be aware of the existence of that dynamic and what it sometimes means for women in science. Right? So sometimes there's romantic relationships. Watson and Raitner got married. So you'll find a few stories like that, okay? So, but generally speaking, great discoveries aren't often the product of one person working on their own in a silo. They come out of partnerships and teams, and sometimes the contribution of the other people in the team and get written out of the narrative. And sometimes just because it's an easier story to tell. It's easier for me to put a picture up of one person in their name than all 20 people that were ever involved, even though that one person couldn't have done it on their own. So in the context of, let's say, work in the workplace, if you're stressed all the time with your job or even your work here, what that can lead to is something called burnout. This is kind of the psychological version of the physiological general adaptation syndrome. And it's characterized by emotional exhaustion. Sometimes you just feel like you're just done with this and you don't care anymore, okay? There's reduced efficacy and accomplishment. You just can't work as hard anymore. Feelings of depersonalization. So burnout can be more common in people who work in, let's say, in healthcare. And it could come to a point where, let's say, nurses are supposed to really and often do care about their patients. When they get burnt out, they might be in a place where they don't have those feelings as much anymore. They could be in a place that's a bit unfeeling. You can get impersonal. And that's part of a self-protective mechanism of distancing oneself. People can also, start feeling cynical. And that's especially true if they're in a workplace where they're not properly supported. So occupational stress and burnout are big topics in IO psychology, but it's not talked about like a mental illness like depression. Right? Burnout is not in the DSM-5. So stress will be with you all your life, and so it's valuable to learn skills to manage it. So I want to do an exercise, and you're always welcome to not participate in an exercise if you don't want to, as you know. But here, I have $1 billion. Now, you know that money will make you happy, right? We learned that last class. Okay, so all you have to do in order to earn this $1 billion, which you can use to solve all your problems, accomplish amazing things, have a great time, is make yourself feel worse. Just temporarily, okay? And just to get the money, not because you really want to feel worse. I'm a fabulously wealthy sadist, and I will pay you handsomely for this. Okay, so the question is, what could you do right now to feel worse, to bring more misery and distress into your life? More anguish, more emptiness, more anger, more struggle, more shame, more illness. Right? What can you do to make it worse? Yes.
Watch the news.
Watch the news. Okay. Especially if you can't do anything about it. Watch the news. Anything else to make things worse? Just doing this for money. Yes.
Somebody steals my laptop.
Oh, so like when you leave your laptop unattended
Yeah, sure.
and you're studying, go, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so because this is like, that's about what they're doing, and I want to make it kind of about you. So maybe
I
it could
guess,
be,
yeah.
yeah, like
Well, I don't know, like I spill like coffee on my laptop.
okay, leave valuables unattended, and kind of, so when you're drinking coffee by your laptop, you're kind of not taking care of your laptop. not sort of taking care of things that are valuable. Valuables. Any other good strategies to feel worse?
Stop studying.
Stop studying, okay. And if you stop studying, then you would sort of get bad grades and feel upset. Yes. Use alcohol. Alcohol is a great one for making things worse. It creates as a coping strategy, it creates so many more problems than it ever solves, okay? So use alcohol or other substances to cope, sort of recreational substances to cope. I saw another hand. Where was it?
Right over there.
Oh, yes.
I'm missing deadlines.
Missing deadlines. Great, because if you miss a deadline, you have to do that embarrassing, extenuating circumstance form that goes to the dean's office. And you also get a 0 when maybe if you guessed, you would have like gotten 25%. So completely missing deadlines is a great one. Yes.
Taxes are legal documents.
Say it louder.
Taxes are legal documents.
Oh, like not filing your taxes.
Yeah.
Great. Yes. Yeah, I have some taxes I haven't filed. I've been sort of avoiding it because it's boring and anxiety provoking. There was a hand. I know there's a second hand. Yes. Excellent. Yes, being withdrawn, staying home and not doing anything because life happens when you're out there, not sitting in your living room. So being withdrawn, especially if that makes you sort of not exercise or erodes your relationships. Great. Okay. Other ones like maybe, I don't know, let's say picking fights. If there's any medication you know that you need to be on, not taking it. When I forget to take my insulin, it goes very, very badly every time. Okay, so I was going to pay you $1 billion, but do I need to do that? Right? Are you already doing any of these things for free? So what we did there is an exercise that was originally developed by clinical psychologists, including Randy Paterson, for people who were severely depressed in a hospital setting. Thank you. Okay. And does anyone, can you recognize or guess what the technique is here? So the question is like, what can you do to make yourself miserable? Like you don't want to be happy. Yes, it is. It's reverse psychology. And so if I were to say to you, to be healthy, you really need to exercise like every day. What does your mind say to that? Sorry? Yeah, it says don't exercise. What does it say? What kind of thoughts come up? It's too hard and it makes you sweaty and it's boring and it ruins your hair and no. So if I say things like you need to exercise, you need to eat healthy, that leaves something unsaid. And what it leaves unsaid is exactly what you brought up there. All the reasons that it's kind of crappy to exercise or to eat healthy, vegetables are yucky. But what he does with this technique, and it's just one technique, works for some people, not for others, is that when we say, okay, how can we be miserable? You start realizing, right? Oh, well, maybe using alcohol to cope is actually not such a great plan. Maybe, being withdrawn doesn't work so well. So it leaves you with that thought instead, right? So your best bets for emotion-focused coping are social support and exercise. Saying that assumes that you have good, mature friends that you can trust, right? So we could say your friends are your resource, but you know from life that sometimes your resources aren't aren't in an ideal place, right? Sometimes you talk to a friend and they say something that makes it worse. Okay, keep that in mind. Same with approaching systems. Sometimes somebody's ill, or they have an encounter with the justice system, and the system doesn't work as well as they were expecting. There's cracks and holes in the system. So what am I saying is these are amazing resources, and yes, approach them wisely as well, okay? So sometimes friends can gossip, and that creates an important role for counselors and psychologists as people have an ethical code, right? They can't talk to other people about your secrets, or you could file a complaint with their professional organization. So that is one reason that psychological services are valuable. If you want to talk about something tough and not have it get around. There are gender differences in coping. So women tend to be a bit better at emotion-focused coping, and men tend to be a bit better, but more oriented to problem-focused coping, to fixing the problem. And sometimes men struggle a bit more when there isn't anything they can do to solve the problem. And so men are a bit more likely to have some more maladaptive emotional strategies like substance use, like withdrawal, like aggression, even against themselves, right? Suicide rates for men are much higher. Exercise is probably the best emotion management tool that has a good masculine appeal compared to something like journaling about feelings. It works very well. If you have problems to deal with in your life, right? You have situations you have to cope with. There are demands, there are stressors, and you're not going to make anything better by running yourself down. The long-term view of not sleeping, not eating well, right? Having a lot of interpersonal conflicts, not being there for your friends so that you lose them is not good, okay? So to deal with the issues in your life, it's kind of best if you're in good shape, right? One that's really important is rest. So sometimes people come in for therapy or counseling, they're talking about all the impossible entangled problems that they can never solve. And if somebody is run down because they're underslept, that's going to influence the way that they think and they feel a lot. Lack of sleep is a strong predictor of depression. And there's one psychologist, I can't remember who he is, but one of the first things he does with all of his clients is check to see that they're sleeping enough. Because you're not going to solve the presenting problem if they're underslept. So there's a foundational role for self-care. And so taking care of yourself looks like getting enough rest. It looks like putting good fuel in your body, staying hydrated, exercising. Your willpower is a resource that drains throughout the day. And at the end of the day, you're going to have less willpower. You're not going to deal with problems as well. So sometimes it helps to deal with issues earlier in the morning when you have the energy. So be aware of your own energy and willpower levels. I have good friends who are good allies who give you good counsel. Okay, if there's a medical regimen that you need to follow to stay healthy, then that's important than a lot of other things. Probably more important. The purpose of that exercise was to demonstrate that you do have some agency. You have some control in your life. You do have a capacity to support your own well-being, and you also have a capacity to undermine it. And it's important to be aware of when you might be doing that. You've probably seen this, right? The Canada Food Guide. And notice that half the plate is fruits and vegetables. There's a lot of controversy in nutrition because it's really hard to do good nutritional research, like really hard. And you can have these debates about whether whole grains are actually good for you and whether dairy is actually good for you. And there's one thing that is like non-controversial, and that's the importance of fruits and vegetables. There's a lot of micronutrients that you get in that spinach smoothie that you're not going to get in a chocolate bar. SMU actually does have dietitians if you want to speak to one. Most people don't eat healthy and exercise and get enough sleep, right? the vast majority of people don't do those things. There's some research on how many people do like 4 core pillars of, I think it's exercise, eat well, don't smoke, get enough sleep. I can't remember what the 4 are, but pretty core ones. And the prevalence is like 3% of people who actually do it. Okay, so I'm standing up here teaching and preaching this, and I don't do it because I don't have time to exercise. What am I gonna have time for that? Okay, see how hard it is? But often people will come in to counseling, they're at rock bottom, and they have all these problems, and self-care is an important part of buffering yourself against some of those issues and of dealing with them successfully. And sometimes getting really run down can invite more problems. If you're interested in this field, there's a subdiscipline of clinical psychology that's known as health psychology. It's about helping people with their healthy behaviors, sometimes under very challenging circumstances. And we have a clinical health psychologist in the department. She's associated with the IO psychology program. Her name is Dana Lee Bagley. She actually wrote a book that's quite clever and witty. So if you're interested in health psychology, I'd encourage you to reach out to Dana. And there's a cognitive side of stress management. We call that appraisal. So how are you thinking about the problem? How are you constructing the problem? So your textbook talks about pessimism versus optimism. Some people can have a sunny view of things. Some people have a negative bias, like they see more problems. They construct them as bigger problems. That's probably related to the personality trait of neuroticism. And there's probably some adaptive value for having a subset of neurotics in the population who easily detect problems and can make other people aware of them. So I don't want to knock neuroticism. There's a cognitive role in appraising your resources. You may have resources that you're not aware of. You may have resources that you haven't tapped into. You may have resources that you've forgotten about. I think of all the friends and mentors and allies you've had in your life, all the things you've learned. So you may be underestimating your own resources to deal with things. And then there are your responses. It takes time in life to develop the skills to handle issues effectively. And when you're younger and when you're less skilled, you're gonna mess some of them up. And you might have some regrets over that, but that's part of the journey. Right? You'll get better at it over time as you learn more skills. Skills to deal with life are learnable. And then appraising the challenges, right? The size of the dragon. Sometimes the things that we're really stressed about aren't really that much of a big deal. So let's say you fail a quiz in this class. It's not the end of the world. Say you failed this class. Not the end of the world. You can take it again, right? And you will in life fail and do things you regret. And once you've done that, it makes sense to look at what you learned from that. And it was probably quite a lot. And sometimes unexpected challenges, sometimes failures take you in different directions, and they're not always bad places. And that's the art of looking at silver linings. I try to be careful with that ethically. Like, you don't want to be like, go do this thing that's probably a bad idea because there could be a silver lining. But once it's already happened, that's a great time to start looking at silver linings and thinking about how you want to go forward. So I'm going to say that failing is also a skill. And as you mature, you'll kind of get better at failing because you're going to keep doing that, right? You're not going to be successful at everything that you set out. Not everything you plan is going to go the way you plan. And there's a skill in managing that as well. The sense of control is really important to the experience of stress. So the strongest stress responses are brought about by a perception that there's an uncontrollable threat. If we feel like we have a sense of control, that's quite relaxing. We feel a lot better. In fact, when people have psychologically traumatic reactions, it's because what happened to them upset their view of of the world. They didn't know that things like that could really happen to them. They didn't know that things were really like that. And you get a really rude, hard lesson that kind of breaks your worldview. And that really takes away people's sense of control. And they have to integrate that experience. They develop a new framework about the world and get back some of that sense of control. So some people have a more internal locus of control that is associated with higher well-being and having a sense that you control your own destiny, that you can control yourself as well, control your impulse, and act the ways you need to act. And some people have a more external locus of control and believe that chance or outside forces control their fate. Now, this is all about perception, and there's a part of me that's asking, well, what about power differences? Is it true that some people have more control in their lives? Is it true that some people have less control? So, exercising your willpower, your ability to control things, does deplete your energy, and it will deplete it over the course of the day, over the course of a week, over the course of a semester. And so if there's something that's important for you to go do, sometimes it's most effective to do that while you have the energy to do it. This is about spending your energy adaptively and about prioritizing. So you have some agency and you can choose when and how to use it to some extent. We take our thoughts very seriously, very, very seriously, sometimes too seriously. This is a bit of an offensive joke from a Buddhist monk that made me laugh. Somebody said it to me when I was very stressed about something. I was taking my thoughts and feelings very, very seriously. If you're stressing about something, your mind isn't here now. You're thinking about the past or the future, okay? So instead of being here now, you've dissociated and you've gone to a place of memory, that's the past, or imagination, that's the future, and the 50 different ways it could turn out. You might be constructing narratives and telling them to yourself and other people, getting upset about it. So that brings me to mindfulness. And there are strategies that you can use to come back to here and now. And there's a lot of them, find them on YouTube. And so here's one sort of simple and easy one. So you have, 7 senses, but let's go with 5. And you could say, well, what are 2 things that you can see right now? I can see you and I can see you. Or what are 2 things that you can smell right now? I can smell a fabric softener on this. What are 2 things you can hear right now? Right? I can hear people tapping on their keyboards. I can hear people moving in their seats. What are 2 things you can feel right now? Maybe you feel your hand on your body. Maybe you feel the desk in front of you. If you go through that, take about 10 seconds. That's one way that you can bring yourself back to here and now. And now is a special place because it's the only time and place that you can actually do anything to make a difference. It's the here and now is where opportunities happen that you can take advantage of. It's an important place to be, but we spend a lot of our time, in fact, most of our time, just not there. It's kind of mildly dissociated and somewhere else. Let's say you have anxious thoughts or feelings, you don't have to get really wrapped up in them. You can have them and have some distance from them. Okay, so cognitive fusion is when you get totally wrapped up in it. So let's say I'm feeling sad, right? Like I don't have the energy, it's too much work, I'm tired, everything is terrible, I'm terrible. There's a way that you could let that take you over. Or you can still have all of those feelings and all of those thoughts and let them happen and have some degree of distance from them. Okay, that's called cognitive diffusion. It's about whether you're tangled up in your thoughts, whether you're letting them kind of drive you, or whether you're in control and those thoughts and feelings are sort of ever-present companions on the journey. A lot of people think that they can sort of get rid of negative thoughts and feelings. No. Okay, they're always going to be there. So here's a metaphor from ACT, and it's the passengers on the bus. So you're the bus driver, you're in control, and you're moving your life in the direction of your values, okay, broadly. And there's passengers on the bus that get on and off, and maybe one of them is your anxiety passenger. And it's pointing out all the things that could go wrong. And you know, that's great. It's good that you have that passenger because there are things that could be wrong that you need to be aware of. But what would happen if you let anxiety drive the bus? It's going to say, no, we're not going anywhere. We're going to go back to the garage and park there and close the garage door and stay there forever because there's too many dangerous things out there. So anxiety can't drive the bus, but actually needs to be on the bus. So your anxiety is adaptive, but there are ways that you could use it maladaptively to undermine yourself. Okay. And there are some exercises. I've posted this on Brightspace. So you might think of your thoughts and feelings as, or unpleasant thoughts and feelings as passengers on the bus. You could see them as clouds in the sky or as traffic on a noisy road. See all these, the idea is to get some distance. And there's one here, it's called the sushi train metaphor. And you're kind of like the sushi chef. And there's these plates that are going by, sushi plates. And those are like all your thoughts and feelings. And you can decide that you're going to pick up one of them and engage it or eat it. You could be like, oh, no, there's my thought about failing my test. And I'm going to let that one go. And you'll have other thoughts, right? Because they're going to keep coming up. So you have some level of agency in choosing to engage that thought. Maybe there's something you want to do about it. Maybe you can decide that you're going to sit down and study. But ideally, you don't get totally entangled with it, where you're like, I'm going to fail everything and nothing is going to help me and it's all too late, right? So I'm getting at the idea of distress tolerance. Many people think or act like they shouldn't have negative emotions because they are negative, have positive emotions all the time. They think they can't do something because they're anxious. It's okay to feel shitty, and sometimes you will. Negative emotions are part of a healthy emotional life. Your negative emotions, right, your anger, your anxiety, and your pain are all adaptive in some capacity. Right? We know that people who can't feel pain don't even survive their own childhood, or rarely do. Okay? And they're all adaptive, but to be adaptive, they have to be managed appropriately. So imagine how much effective you could be if you respected your negative emotions as resources and could use them to respond in ways that support your own success. So anxiety tells you about potential danger, and you, the bus driver, need to know about that, while also not letting the anxiety take over and drive the bus. Okay, so courage is doing what you need to do, even though you're scared. When you show courage, you're driving that bus, and your anxiety passenger is right there with you the whole time. Your sadness teaches you what you value, and sometimes it's your body telling you that it's time to rest. Sometimes you need to listen to that passenger. And your anger, that can be a gift to yourself, from yourself, that tells you what you need. Tells you what your boundaries are, so that you can go communicate them. So you can go and try to create the change in the world that will make things better. Your shame, the things you regret, that is the root of your compassion and your empathy for all the other people who do those things too. So the textbook talks about spirituality and well-being, that there's a faith factor where people with regular religious attendance have higher well-being, life satisfaction, and a longer lifespan. Context matters. So that is more true in religious countries. Try being an atheist in Saudi Arabia. It will shorten your lifespan. Okay. I laugh a bit when it says more true because, right, is it true or not true? Or are there degrees of truthiness? So we could look at this sort of scientifically, non-theologically, and say, why does this tend to be true? And maybe one of them is health behaviors. So Muslims, at least in theory, don't drink. And drinking alcohol can mess you up 6 ways to Sunday and create a lot more problems than it ever solves. Religious communities provide social support. And it's a kind of social support that's more than a workplace provides, where you work in a certain place for a while and then you leave and then you kind of can't go back anymore because your key card doesn't work. And those aren't your colleagues anymore. But religious communities are places where you can be sort of born into and live your life through them. And they're there for you at the end. That's a very special kind of social support. It's like a family. So maybe a strong family would do the same thing. And then also some sort of positive emotions associated with well-being, with like hope or optimism or a sense of coherence or meaning. It's associated with less stress or anxiety. Now, something that your textbook doesn't address is, well, what if you don't believe? Well, there are many long-term communities that are based on values. Right? There are service organizations that people spend much of their lives or their whole lives in, and they span things from Girl Guides all the way up to, what's that group again? I can't remember. I met someone camping who was in it, who was totally into it. Freemasons. So there's some kind of long-term community for lots of different values, whether those are solving problems in the world or living in a certain way. There are religions that are liberal to the point that belief is not required. So within a religion, like say Judaism, there's the Orthodox arm or branch, and then there would be the Reform branch. And some religions are so liberal that they don't even have a creed. And then there are many participating non-believers. So in any like even seemingly pretty conservative religious space, it's quite common, quite prevalent that some people are participating culturally. So what I need to say is that I think these are accessible to, that this is accessible to people who have a religion and maybe people who don't. There are other ways to access spiritual values, which are commonly a sense of wonder, humility, compassion, stewardship, the idea that there's something bigger than yourself. Does anyone know what this picture is? Seen it? It's like the big picture. I see a yes. So what is this a photograph of? So that's a photograph of the Earth. Not that one. This one. Well, yes, that's a photograph of the Earth. This is also a photograph of the Earth. This was taken on February 14th in 1990 by the Voyager 1 space probe at a distance of 6 billion kilometers out. And a NASA astronomer, his name is Carl Sagan, requested that as it left the solar system, it turn its camera back and take one last picture of the Earth. And that's the Earth. Okay, and it's so small. It's just like a speck of dust in a sunbeam, but that's here and that's us. And it's the only place we have. And we have to take care of it and we have to share it. And that is a really big project. And so I posted a video on Brightspace that's a tape of Carl Sagan just talking about this picture. So he's an astronomer and he's somebody that's very connected to a sense of calling. You can really hear that in the way he talks about it. So it's a good example of someone who found a psychological sense of calling in work. And it's a little early, but that brings me to the end of today's lecture. Any questions, comments? No? Okay. For Sunday, March the 13th, you have a quiz. And I'm going to have some items from the guest presentations, I think about 4. So please review that material. Emma Sylvester came up with 3 and she was so into it and made such great questions that I had to use them. And next class, we'll be talking about social psychology and relationships. So thank you for your attention.